John Joseph Gotti Jr., an American mobster, held the position of boss within the Gambino crime family in New York City. In December 1985, he played a key role in the orchestrated murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano, subsequently assuming leadership of the family. This move positioned him as the head of what was considered America's most influential crime syndicate. Growing up in impoverished circumstances, Gotti and his brothers turned to a life of crime early on. Gotti swiftly rose to prominence as one of the crime family's top earners, mentored by Aniello Delaros, the Gambino family underboss, operating out of Ozone Park in Queens. Following the FBI's indictment of Gotti's crew members for narcotics trafficking, Gotti began to fear reprisals from Castellano, who disapproved of drug dealing. Fueled by this fear and amidst internal dissent over the family's leadership, Gotti orchestrated Castellano's murder. During his peak, Gotti held considerable power as one of the most formidable and perilous crime bosses in the United States. Known for his outspoken personality and extravagant style, he earned the moniker the Dapper Don for his expensive attire and charismatic demeanor in front of the media. Despite his peers generally avoiding publicity, Gotti became a public figure. He later gained the nickname the Teflon Don, after 3 high-profile trials in the 1980s resulted in acquittals. However, it was later revealed that the trials were tainted by jury tampering, juror misconduct, and witness intimidation. Law enforcement authorities continued building a case against Gotti, who reportedly amassed annual earnings ranging from $5 to $20 million as the Gambino boss. Gotti's underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, collaborated with the FBI to secure Gotti's conviction. In 1991, Gravano opted to become a state's witness, testifying against Gotti after overhearing disparaging remarks made by the boss on a wiretap that implicated them both in multiple murders. In 1992, Gotti faced convictions for 5 murders: conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, illegal gambling, extortion, and loan sharking. Sentenced to life in prison without parole, he was transferred to the United States Penitentiary, Marion. Gotti succumbed to throat cancer on June 10, 2002, at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. Anthony Gaspipe Casso, the former underboss of the Lucchese crime family, attributed Gotti's actions as the catalyst for the decline of Cosa Nostra. Born on October 27, 1940, in the Bronx borough of New York City, Gotti was the 5th of 13 children, 2 deceased at birth, to John Joseph Gotti Sr. and Filomena Fanny DiCarlo. Although his parents were New York City natives, it is presumed that his grandparents hailed from San Giuseppe Vesuviano in the province of Naples, Italy, as his parents married and resided there for a period. Gotti was one of 5 brothers initiated into the Gambino crime family. Eugene Gene Gotti preceded John due to the latter's incarceration. Peter Gotti was initiated under John's leadership in 1988, and Richard V Gotti earned recognition as a caporegime, a made member overseeing a crew of soldiers with significant social status, by 2002. The 5th brother, Vincent, received initiation in 2002. At the age of 12, the Gotti family settled in East New York, Brooklyn, where John grew up in poverty alongside his siblings. His father worked sporadically as a day laborer. As an adult, Gotti harbored resentment toward his father for the family's financial struggles. In school, he developed a history of truancy and bullying, eventually dropping out of Franklin K. Lane High School at the age of 16. Engaging in street gangs affiliated with New York City mafiosi since the age of 12, Gotti's early years were marked by criminal involvement. At 14, while attempting to steal a cement mixer from a construction site, the mixer fell, crushing his toes and leaving him with a permanent limp. Upon leaving school, he committed himself to the Mafia-associated Fulton Rockaway Boys gang, forming connections with future Gambino mobsters Angelo Ruggiero and Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson. In 1958, Gotti encountered his future wife, Victoria DiGiorgio, a woman of half Italian and half Russian descent, at a bar. They married on March 6, 1962. FBI documents revealed that DiGiorgio had a previous marriage and 1 child from that union. The couple went on to have 5 children: Angela, Victoria, John Jr., Frank, who passed away in 1980, and Peter. Despite attempting legitimate work in 1962 as a presser in a coat factory and an assistant truck driver, Gotti struggled to stay away from a life of crime, leading to 2 jail sentences by 1966. From his teenage years, Gotti ran errands for Carmen Fatico, a capo in the Gambino family, then known as the Anastasia family under boss Albert Anastasia. Participating in truck hijackings at Idlewild Airport, later renamed John F. Kennedy International Airport, alongside his brother Gene and friend Ruggiero, Gotti developed a friendship with fellow mob hijacker and future Bonanno family boss Joseph Massino. During this period, he earned the nicknames Black John and Crazy Horse. It was around this time that Gotti encountered his mentor and Gambino underboss Aniello, Neil Delarose. In February 1968, Gotti came under the radar of United Airlines employees who identified him as the individual who had signed for stolen merchandise. Shortly after, the FBI apprehended him for his involvement in that hijacking. Despite being out on bail, Gotti faced another arrest 2 months later, this time for hijacking a shipment of cigarettes valued at $50,000 on the New Jersey Turnpike. Later that year, Gotti entered a guilty plea for the Northwest Airlines hijacking and received a 3-year sentence at Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. Released on parole in 1972, Gotti and Ruggiero returned to their former crew at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, continuing their association with Fatico. Gotti assumed responsibility for overseeing the illegal gambling operations of the Bergen crew, showcasing his effectiveness as an enforcer. Fatico faced loansharking charges in 1972 and, as a condition of his release, was prohibited from associating with known felons. Although Gotti had not yet attained official membership in the Mafia, as the membership books had been closed since 1957 following the Appalachian meeting, Fatico designated him acting capo of the Bergen crew soon after his parole. In this capacity, Gotti regularly visited Delarose's headquarters at the Rave Night Social Club to update the underboss on the crew's activities. Delarose, already favorably disposed towards Gotti, forged an even closer bond with him during this period. The similarities between the two, including strong violent tendencies, frequent use of profanity, and a penchant for heavy gambling, further solidified their connection. In 1973, following the kidnapping and murder of Emmanuel Gambino, nephew to boss Carlo Gambino, Gotti, along with Ruggiero and Ralph Gallione, was assigned to the hit team tasked with locating the main suspect, gangster James McBratney. The team's attempt to abduct McBratney at a Staten Island bar, posing as detectives, went awry, resulting in Gallione shooting McBratney dead as his accomplices managed to subdue him. Gotti, identified by eyewitnesses and a police insider, was arrested for the killing in June 1974. Despite his involvement in a hit, Gotti managed to secure a plea bargain with the assistance of attorney Roy Cohn, ultimately receiving a 4-year prison sentence for attempted manslaughter. Following Gotti's demise, Massino implicated him as the perpetrator of Vito Borelli's murder, a Gambino associate slain in 1975 for disrespecting then-acting boss Paul Castellano. Remo Franceschini, a member of the NYPD specializing in organized crime from 1957 to 1991, explained in 1993 why he foresaw Gotti becoming a significant mafia figure. He was charismatic and a leader. He wasn't a womanizer. He spent all his time with his men. He also had a very sharp mind and total recall. And he exuded toughness. There were few men who would go against him. On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino passed away at home from natural causes. Contrary to expectations, he designated Castellano as his successor over underboss Delarose. Gambino seemed to believe that Castellano's emphasis on white-collar enterprises would benefit the crime family. At the time, Delarose was imprisoned for tax evasion and unable to challenge Castellano's ascension. Castellano's appointment was confirmed at a meeting on November 24, with Delarose in attendance. To preserve Delarose's underboss, Castellano arranged for him to oversee traditional Cosa Nostra activities such as extortion, robbery, and loansharking. While Delarose accepted Castellano's leadership, the arrangement effectively divided the Gambino family into two rival factions. In 1976, reports suggested the reopening of membership books. Gotti, released in July 1977 after a 2-year imprisonment, was initiated as a made man into the Gambino family, now under Castellano's command. Immediately elevated to replace Fatico as capo of the Bergen crew, Gotti and his crew reported directly to Delarose, cementing Gotti's status as Delarose's protégé. Under Gotti's leadership, the crew became Delarose's top earners. In addition to a share of his subordinates' earnings, Gotti ran his own loansharking operation and held a no-show job as a plumbing supply salesman. Unconfirmed reports from FBI informants at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club alleged that Gotti also financed drug deals. Gotti endeavored to shield most of his immediate family from involvement in his criminal endeavors, except for his son John Angelo Gotti, who had become a mob associate by 1982. In December 1978, Gotti played a role in the largest unrecovered cash robbery in history, the infamous Lufthansa heist at Kennedy Airport. Gotti coordinated the disposal of the getaway van, arranging for it to be crushed and baled at a Brooklyn scrapyard. However, the driver, Parnell Stacks Edwards, failed to comply with instructions. Instead of taking the vehicle to the scrapyard, he parked it near a fire hydrant and slept at his girlfriend's apartment. Tragedy struck on March 18, 1980, when Gotti's youngest son, 12-year-old Frank Gotti, was accidentally run over and killed on a family friend's minibike by a neighbor named John Favara. Although Frank's death was ruled an accident, Favara faced death threats and was attacked by Victoria with a baseball bat when he visited the Gottis to apologize. On July 28, 1980, Favara was abducted and disappeared, presumed murdered. Despite Gotti and his family leaving for a vacation in Florida 3 days before the incident, Gotti is widely believed to have ordered the murder. During his final 2 years as the Bergen Capo, Gotti faced 2 indictments, and both cases went to trial after his elevation to the boss of the Gambinos. In September 1984, an altercation with refrigerator mechanic Romuald Pisak led to assault and robbery charges against Gotti. In 1985, he and Delaros, along with several Bergen crew members, were indicted in a racketeering case by Assistant U.S. Attorney Diane Giacalone. The indictment disclosed that Gotti's friend and co-defendant Wilfred "Willie Boy" Johnson had been an FBI informant. Gotti swiftly grew discontented with Castellano's leadership, perceiving the new boss as excessively isolated and driven by greed. Like other family members, Gotti personally harbored disdain for Castellano, who lacked street credibility and failed to earn the respect of those who had paid their dues in street-level operations. Additionally, Gotti had an economic stake in the matter, engaging in a dispute with Castellano over the portion Gotti received from hijackings at Kennedy Airport. Rumors circulated that Gotti was venturing into drug dealing, a lucrative enterprise prohibited by Castellano. In August 1983, Ruggiero and Jean Gotti faced arrest for heroin dealing, primarily based on recordings from a bug in Ruggiero's residence. Castellano, who had explicitly prohibited made men in his family from involvement in drug dealing under the threat of death, demanded transcripts of the tapes. When Ruggiero refused, Castellano threatened to demote Gotti. In 1984, Castellano found himself arrested and indicted in a RICO case linked to the crimes of Gambino hitman Roy DiMeo's crew. The subsequent year brought a second indictment for his role in the Mafia's commission. Facing potential life imprisonment for either case, Castellano orchestrated for Gotti to act as a boss alongside Thomas Bellotti, Castellano's favored capo, and Thomas Gambino in his absence. Simultaneously, Gotti collaborated with discontented capos Frank DeCicco and Joseph Joe Piney Armone, along with soldiers Sammy Gravano and Robert Dib DiBernardo, collectively referred to as the Fist, to plot the overthrow of Castellano. Despite Castellano's inaction, Gotti insisted that the boss would eventually attempt to eliminate him. Armone's backing was crucial. As a respected veteran dating back to the family's founder, Vincent Mangano, he provided the credibility necessary for the conspirators' cause. In the Mafia, the long-standing rule dictated that the assassination of a boss required the majority approval of the commission. Gotti's planned hit would have marked the first unsanctioned attack on a boss since the near-fatal attempt on Frank Costello in 1957. Recognizing the risk and seeking support from the other 4 bosses, who held enduring ties to Castellano, Gotti took an alternative route by gaining the backing of influential figures from his generation in the Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno families. The Genovese family was deliberately omitted from Gotti's considerations, as Castellano's close ties with Genovese boss Vincent Chin Giganti made any outreach to a Genovese soldier a potential giveaway. However, Gotti could rely on the complicity of Gambino consigliere Joseph N. Gallo. Following Delaros's death from cancer on December 2, 1985, Castellano revised his succession plan, appointing Bellotti as underboss to Thomas Gambino, the sole acting boss, while making arrangements to disband Gotti's crew. Enraged by this and Castellano's refusal to attend Delaros's wake, Gotti resolved to eliminate his boss. Upon receiving a tip from DeCicco about a meeting between Castellano and several other Gambino mobsters at Sparks Steakhouse on December 16, 1985, Gotti seized the opportunity. In the evening, as both the boss and underboss arrived for the meeting, they were ambushed and fatally shot by assassins under Gotti's command. Gotti observed the hit from his car alongside Gravano. Several days following the murder, Gotti was appointed to a temporary 3-man committee, alongside Gallo and DeCicco, tasked with overseeing the family until the election of a new boss. Simultaneously, an internal investigation into Castellano's murder was announced. Despite these formalities, it was widely known that Gotti was effectively the acting boss, and nearly all of the family's capos were aware of his involvement in the hit. In a meeting of 20 capos on January 15, 1986, Gotti was formally acclaimed as the new boss of the Gambino family. He appointed DeCicco as the new underboss while retaining Gallo as consigliere. Identified as both Castellano's likely murderer and his successor, Gotti gained notoriety throughout 1986. At the time of his ascension, the Gambino family held the status of the most powerful American mafia family, boasting an annual income of $500 million. In Gravano's book, Underboss, Gotti's annual income was estimated to be no less than $5 million during his years as boss, likely ranging between $10 million and $12 million. To safeguard himself legally, Gotti prohibited Gambino family members from accepting plea bargains that acknowledged the existence of the organization. During his trials, Gotti often smiled and waved at television cameras, earning him some favor with the general public. Gotti's newfound celebrity had a positive outcome. When Romuald Pisak, the victim of an attack linked to Gotti, discovered the attacker's affiliation and faced intimidation by the Gambinos, he chose not to testify against Gotti, thanks to Boško, the Yugo, Radonjic, the head of the Westies in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan. When the trial commenced in March 1986, Pisak claimed an inability to recall the assailant. The case was swiftly dismissed, and the New York Post summarized the proceedings with the headline, "I forgot T." Subsequently, it was revealed that Gambino associates had tampered with Pisak's brake lines, issued threatening phone calls, and stalked him before the trial. On April 13, 1986, following a visit to Castellano loyalist James Fila, DeCicco fell victim to a car bombing that claimed his life. Victor Amuso and Anthony Casso of the Lucchese family executed the bombing under orders from Giganti and Lucchese boss Anthony Corallo, seeking retribution for Castellano and Bellotti's deaths by targeting their successors. Gotti had also planned to visit Fila on that day but cancelled the visit. The bomb was detonated after a soldier accompanying DeCicco was mistaken for the boss. The use of bombs was a violation of Mafia rules, which prohibited their use due to concerns about endangering innocent bystanders. Initially suspecting Zips, Sicilian mafiosi working in the U.S., the Gambinos later learned about the Lucchese family's involvement, as Zips were notorious for employing bombs. Following the bombing, Judge Eugene Nickerson, presiding over Gotti's racketeering trial, rescheduled the proceedings to avoid a jury tainted by the ensuing publicity. Additionally, Giacalone had Gotti's bail revoked due to evidence of witness intimidation in the Pisak case. While in jail, Gotti ordered the murder of Robert DiBernardo by Gravano. Both DiBernardo and Ruggiero had been contenders to succeed DeCicco until Ruggiero accused DiBernardo of challenging Gotti's leadership. Frustrated by Ruggiero's abrasive behavior during preliminary hearings, Gotti instead promoted Armone to underboss. Jury selection for the racketeering case resumed in August 1986, with Gotti standing trial alongside his former companion William, Willie Boy, Johnson, who, despite being exposed as an informant, refused to turn state's evidence, Leonard DiMaria, Tony Rampino, Nicholas Carrazzo, and John Carneglia. At this juncture, the Gambinos successfully compromised the case when George Pape concealed his friendship with Radonjic and was selected as juror number 11. Pape, through Radonjic, contacted Gravano and agreed to sell his vote on the jury for $60,000. During the trial's opening statements on September 25, Gotti's defense attorney Bruce Cutler denied the existence of the Gambino family, portraying the government's efforts as a personal vendetta. His primary defense strategy aimed to undermine the credibility of prosecutor Diane Giacalone's witnesses by highlighting their pre-cooperation criminal activities. In the course of Gotti's defense, Cutler called upon bank robber Matthew Traynor, a prosecution witness dropped due to unreliability, who claimed that Giacalone had offered him drugs and her underwear as an inducement for testimony. However, Judge Nickerson dismissed Traynor's allegations as wholly unbelievable after the trial, and Traynor was subsequently convicted of perjury. Despite Cutler's defense efforts and criticisms of the prosecution, according to mob writers Jerry Capisi and Gene Mustaine, a majority of the jury leaned towards convicting Gotti when deliberations commenced. However, due to Pape's misconduct, Gotti was aware from the trial's outset that he could, at worst, face a hung jury. During deliberations, Pape initially insisted on acquittal, but as the rest of the jury grew concerned about their safety, he eventually relented. On March 13, 1987, Gotti and his co-defendants were acquitted of all charges, including loansharking, illegal gambling, murder, and armed hijackings. 5 years later, Pape was convicted of obstruction of justice for his role in the jury tampering and received a 3-year prison sentence. Gotti's acquittal, given previous Mafia convictions and the success of the Mafia Commission trial, was a significant upset that further enhanced his reputation. The media dubbed Gotti the Teflon Don in reference to the failure of any charges to stick. While Gotti himself escaped conviction, his associates were not as fortunate. The other two members of the Gambino administration, underboss Armone and consigliere Gallo, faced racketeering charges in 1986 and were both convicted in December 1987. The heroin trial of Gotti's former Bergen crew members, Ruggiero and Gene Gotti, also began in June of that year. Before their convictions, Gotti granted Gallo permission to retire and elevated Gravano to his position, while designating Frank Locascio as acting underboss in anticipation of Armone's potential imprisonment. The Gambino family also undertook efforts to compromise the jury in the heroin trial, leading to 2 mistrials. Upon the release of the terminally ill Ruggiero in 1989, Gotti, resentful of the Gambino's setbacks, distanced himself from Ruggiero and held him responsible for their misfortunes. Gravano revealed that Gotti even contemplated the idea of murdering Ruggiero, and when Ruggiero eventually passed away, Gotti showed reluctance to attend the funeral. Starting in January 1988, Gotti, against Gravano's counsel, mandated weekly meetings with his capos at the Rave Night Social Club. Deemed unnecessary and risky by Gene, and viewed as contrary to the secretive nature of the secret society by FBI Gambino squad leader Bruce Mao, this directive allowed FBI surveillance to identify much of the Gambino hierarchy. It also served as strong circumstantial evidence supporting Gotti's role as boss, given the Mafia's long-standing protocol of requiring public displays of loyalty to the boss. Although the FBI bugged the Rave Night, it failed to produce high-quality incriminating recordings. Later in 1988, Gotti, along with Gigante and the new Lucchese boss Victor Amuzzo, attended the first commission meeting at the La Barbat Club in Manhattan since the commission trial. In 1986, Gambino capo Mickey Paradiso had carried out an unauthorized hit that injured future Lucchese underboss Anthony Casso. The following year, the FBI warned Gotti about recorded discussions by Genovese consigliere Louis Manna regarding another hit on Gotti and his brother. To avert a potential conflict, the leaders of the 3 families convened, denied knowledge of hostilities, and pledged to communicate better. The bosses also agreed to admit Colombo acting boss Victor Orina to the commission, but Gigante, wary of strengthening Gotti's majority with another ally, blocked the return of Massino and the Bonanos. In 1988, Gotti wielded influence over the New Jersey-based DeCavalcanti crime family. Anthony Rotundo, a DeCavalcanti capo turned informant, revealed that Gotti, accompanied by numerous Gambino mobsters, attended his father's wake in a show of force, compelling boss John Riggi to agree to run the DeCavalcanti family under the Gambino's influence. The DeCavalcantes remained within the Gambino's sphere of influence until Gotti's incarceration. Gotti's son, John Gotti Jr., received initiation into the Gambino family on Christmas Eve 1988. Michael DiLeonardo, a fellow mobster initiated on the same night, recounted that Gravano conducted the ceremony to avoid accusations of nepotism. Subsequently, John Jr. was swiftly promoted to the position of capo. On the evening of January 23, 1989, Gotti was arrested outside the Rave Night and charged with orchestrating the 1986 assault on labor union official John O'Connor. While in the back of the police car, Gotti confidently remarked, 3-1 I beat this charge. O'Connor, a leader in the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America Local 608 who later faced racketeering charges, was believed to have ordered an attack on a Gambino-associated restaurant. He was subsequently shot and wounded by the Westies. After spending 1 night in prison, Gotti secured release on $100,000 bail, with his occupation listed as a salesman for a plumbing contracting company. By this point, the FBI had cultivated new informants and discovered that part of the reason the Rave Night bug failed was because Gotti often held sensitive conversations in a rear hallway of the club's building or in an apartment on its upper floors, where a friendly widow of a Gambino soldier resided. By November 1989, both locations were successfully bugged. The apartment bug proved particularly fruitful, capturing Gotti's candid discussions about his role as the family boss during meetings. In a conversation on December 12 with Frank Locascio, Gotti openly admitted to ordering the murders of DiBernardo and Liborio Milito, the latter being one of Gravano's associates killed for insubordination. Gotti also expressed his intention to eliminate soldier Louis de Bono, who had ignored a summons for a meeting to discuss his mismanagement of a drywall business with Gotti and Gravano. Unfortunately, the FBI misheard the name and failed to warn de Bono, who was killed on October 4, 1990. In another taped meeting on January 4, 1990, Gotti promoted Gravano to the position of underboss, indicating his preference for Gravano to lead the family in the event of Gotti's conviction in the assault case. Gotti found himself linked to the case when state prosecutors presented a recording of him discussing John O'Connor and declaring his intention to bust him up. Additionally, Westies gangster James McElroy provided testimony. However, Gotti managed to secure acquittal on all 6 assault and conspiracy charges during the trial on February 9, 1990. The locals celebrated with firework displays after the verdict. Jules J. Bonavolonta, the director of the FBI's Organized Crime Division in New York, expressed concern over Gotti's rising popularity, stating, "With all this media coverage, he's beginning to look like a folk hero. What the public should realize is that he is the boss of the largest Cosa Nostra family, that he surrounds himself with ruthless killers, and that he is flat out a criminal." It later came to light that FBI bugs had apparently captured Gotti discussing plans to manipulate the jury, similar to what happened in the 1986-87 racketeering case. However, the FBI and federal prosecutors chose not to disclose this information to Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau and State Organized Crime Task Force Chief Ronald Goldstock, causing outrage. Morgenthau later stated that had he known about these bugged conversations, he would have requested a mistrial. Gotti, Gravano, and Frank Locascio were frequently recorded by the bugs strategically placed throughout the rave night, concealed in the main room, the first-floor hallway, and the upstairs apartment of the building, discussing incriminating events. On December 11, 1990, FBI agents and NYPD detectives raided the rave night, resulting in the arrests of Gotti, Gravano, and Locascio. In this new racketeering case, federal prosecutors charged Gotti with 5 murders: Castellano, Bellotti, DiBernardo, Liborio Milito, and, after a review of the apartment tapes, Louis DeBono, conspiracy to murder Gaetano, Corky, Vostola, as well as charges of loansharking, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, bribery, and tax evasion. Despite efforts to secure bail based on tapes from FBI bugs played at pretrial hearings, the Gambino administration was denied bail. Simultaneously, attorneys Bruce Cutler and Gerald Shargel were disqualified from defending Gotti and Gravano after prosecutors successfully argued that they were part of the evidence and could be called as witnesses. Prosecutors contended that Cutler and Shargel not only had knowledge of potential criminal activity but had also served as in-house counsel for the Gambino family. Subsequently, Gotti hired Albert Krieger, a Miami attorney who had previously worked with Joseph Bonanno, to replace Cutler. The recorded conversations further strained the relationship between Gotti and Gravano, with the Gambino boss portraying his newly appointed underboss as excessively greedy. Gotti attempted to shift blame onto Gravano, framing him as the primary force behind the murders of DiBernardo, Milito, and DeBono. Despite Gotti's efforts at reconciliation, the attempt failed, leaving Gravano disenchanted with the mob and skeptical about his chances of winning his case without Shargel, his former attorney. Ultimately, Gravano decided to become a government witness, formally agreeing to testify on November 13, 1991. His decision marked him as the highest-ranking member of a New York crime family to turn informant until Joseph Massino in 2003. Gotti and Locascio faced trial in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York before District Judge I. Leo Glasser. Jury selection commenced in January 1992, featuring an anonymous jury that, for the first time in a Brooklyn federal case, was fully sequestered during the trial due to Gotti's reputation for tampering with juries. The prosecution's opening statements on February 12 included the playing of tapes where Gotti discussed Gambino family matters, approved murders, and confirmed the animosity between Gotti and Castellano to establish the motive behind killing his boss. The trial proceeded with the eyewitness of the Sparks hit identifying Carneglia as one of the gunmen who shot Bellotti. On March 2, Gravano took the stand to testify. During his testimony, Gravano affirmed Gotti's position within the Gambino family's hierarchy and provided a detailed account of the conspiracy to assassinate Castellano, offering a comprehensive description of the hit and its aftermath. Gravano admitted to participating in 19 murders, implicating Gotti in 4 of them. Despite cross-examination attempts by Gotti's attorney, Albert Krieger, and Locascio's attorney, Anthony Cardinali, Gravano remained steadfast in his testimony. The government rested its case on March 24 after presenting additional testimony and tapes. 5 of Krieger and Cardinali's intended 6 witnesses were deemed irrelevant or extraneous, leaving only Gotti's tax attorney, Murray Appleman, to testify on his behalf. The defense's attempt to declare a mistrial based on prosecutor Andrew Maloney's closing remarks proved unsuccessful. Gotti himself grew increasingly hostile during the trial, prompting Judge I. Leo Glasser to threaten to remove him from the courtroom. Among his outbursts, Gotti referred to Gravano as a junkie while his attorneys sought to discuss Gravano's past steroid use, and he likened the dismissal of a juror to the fixing of the 1991 World Series. On April 2, 1992, after only 14 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gotti guilty on all charges in the indictment. Locascio was found guilty on all but one count. James Fox, assistant director in charge of the FBI's New York field office, declared at a press conference, "The Teflon is gone. The Don is covered with Velcro, and all the charges stuck." On June 23, 1992, Glasser sentenced both defendants to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and imposed a $250,000 fine. Gotti served his sentence at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, spending the majority of his time in effective solitary confinement, with only 1 hour outside his cell each day. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeal in 1994. On July 18, 1996, Gotti was punched by fellow inmate Walter Johnson in the prison recreation room, resulting in bruises and bleeding. According to reports, Gotti had disrespected Johnson with a racial slur. Seeking retaliation, Gotti offered Aryan Brotherhood leaders David Sahakian and Michael McElhinney between $40,000 and $400,000 to have Johnson killed. In August, McElhinney instructed 2 Brotherhood members to kill Johnson, if given the opportunity, as outlined in a federal indictment charging him and 39 other gang members with murder, attempted murder, and racketeering. However, Johnson was subsequently transferred to the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. Despite his incarceration and pressure from the commission to step down, Gotti insisted on retaining his title as boss until his death or retirement, delegating orders through his brother Peter and his son John Jr. By 1998, when he faced racketeering charges, John Jr. was believed to be the acting boss of the family. Contrary to his father's wishes, John Jr. pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 6 years and 5 months in 1999. He asserts that he has since distanced himself from the Gambino family. Peter Gotti then assumed the role of acting boss and is thought to have formally succeeded his brother shortly before Gotti's death. John Jr.'s indictment added further strain to Gotti's marriage. Victoria DiGiorgio Gotti, unaware of her son's Mafia involvement until then, held her husband responsible for jeopardizing their son's life and threatened to leave unless John Jr. was allowed to exit the mob. In 1998, Gotti received a diagnosis of throat cancer and underwent surgery at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. Although the tumor was removed, the cancer resurfaced 2 years later, leading to Gotti's return to Springfield, where he spent the remainder of his life. Gotti's health rapidly deteriorated, and he passed away on June 10, 2002, at the age of 61. The Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn announced that Gotti's family would not be allowed to have a requiem mass but permitted a memorial mass after the burial. Gotti's funeral took place in a non-church venue. Following the funeral, approximately 300 onlookers trailed the procession, which passed by Gotti's Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, and proceeded to the gravesite. Gotti's remains were laid to rest in a crypt beside his son, Frank. Unfortunately, Gotti's brother, Peter, was unable to attend due to his incarceration. In what seemed to be a rejection of Gotti's leadership and legacy, none of the other New York City crime families sent representatives to the funeral. The numerous prosecutions resulting from Gotti's tactics had left the Gambino family in disarray, with half of its made men behind bars by the turn of the century. Since his conviction, Gotti has been featured in 6 television films, 3 documentary series, 3 theatrical films, and has been the subject of lyrics and music.